I just like to pull everything out and kind of see what I'm working with. I'm not sure if I'm going to use the banner or the flowers quite yet, but I'm going to base coat everything just so I have everything ready to go and then I can decide later. So just going to place all these little guys over here. And I like to start by using a pencil and just drawing just a really rough kind of idea of where this top layer is going to sit. And then I just don't have to spend a lot of time on my first layer where it's going to get covered by the couch and the lamp. So I'm just going to set this one aside and let's get going. So with the sets, you get everything you need to get going except a cup of water and then either a paper towel or an old cloth. So I do have just an old cloth here all ready to go. And just gonna pop open my paints here. So I'm ready to go. So this set is brand new. It's not on my website yet, but keep an eye out. I should have it up after the weekend, probably early next week. So I'm gonna get my brush wet, and that just helps the paint glide a little bit better. I'm gonna pull out a pretty good amount of black and just place a little on my palette and slowly mix in just a little bit of water. And I'm gonna do my whole back here in black for the sky. And having that little pencil line is quite nice because then you can see just how far you need to go to make sure everything's covered. And don't worry too much about going over any of the engraved lines. Even when you put paint over top, you will still be able to see them and we'll be able to follow along to add some nice water coming out of that later. Perfect, so. And I always dip my brush in water as I go. It just makes the paint easier to work with. I use a very thick acrylic paint when I'm working with wood, just because your coverage is quite a bit more. So that is the paint that you get with your kits, is just this really nice thick acrylic. And we're just going to continue painting this in black. And don't worry too much if you end up going over the lines. Yeah, if you end up going over the lines at all, it's no big deal because we're going to come and we're going to paint that over with a gray for the stone for the fountain afterwards. So, and actually I'm going to bring in just a little bit of a darker blue. So I got a little bit of blue on my palette here. And I'm going to mix in a little bit of black and then a little bit of white. And I do apologize if the video is lagging. we are doing all these tests right now just so we can see what the quality is, but I am filming this with our other camera as well. So this video will be saved so you can follow along later. So I'm just gonna, just a nice little navy blue almost here. And I'm gonna put that along the bottom, and then I'm gonna blend it in with my black. Just so it's not a pure black sky, but you can still tell that it's nighttime. And I really want the fountain and then the couch on the second layer to stand out, so. And the key for blending is lots of water. So with the blue, I'm just gonna bring it all the way down. And once again, don't worry too much about staying in the lines. So if you bring the paint all the way down along the base, and then get your brush really, really watery. And as you can see, the paint is very, very fluid. And then you just run your paintbrush back and forth and just keep adding water, and it will just do a nice natural blend of the blue and the black. So if you can see that there, we got a little bit of an ombre happening. So I used up all my blue, so I'm just gonna mix a little bit more. So I have just a little bit of blue on my brush there. And then I'm gonna pull just a touch of black and then clean my brush before I contaminate my white. There we go. We're gonna mix that all together. And there we go. We'll follow along the top of the fountain with the blue. And let me know if your guys' video is coming through all right, or if I'm still lagging, or if my audio's not catching up. This will just let us know what we have to fix before we do our real paint night next week. This is just a little test so we can see how everything's gonna work. So I'm gonna get my brush really quite watery again, so you can see it is dripping with water. And very little paint, mostly water. And you just run your brush back and forth, and it just really blends those two colors. And I'm gonna take this really watery blue, and I'm just gonna go back and forth up here a little bit to add a little bit more of an interesting tone to the sky. And then, make sure my brush is nice and clean. I'm gonna grab just a little bit of white, and I'm gonna mix that in with this blue. It's a really watery blue now, and it's just a little bit lighter. And I'm just gonna run that just along the whole bottom. And then just work it in back and forth. And we got a nice natural looking sky there. Perfect. So next we'll do the gray of the fountain. So we can clean our brushes off here. I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna pull quite a bit of white. I don't know if you can see that the huge glob, and I'm gonna put it just here. I'm gonna clean my brush off. And I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna grab just a little bit of black. Black is a pretty harsh tone. So if you can see there, it's like 1 black to about 5 white is what we're gonna wanna do. We're gonna blend that all together and get a nice light gray. So now that we got the gray mixed, we're going to base coat the fountain. And I always like to keep adding water as I go to make this nice and fluid. And now here's where you have to be a little bit more careful. So I like to use the very top of my brush and I kind of swipe back and forth like this in order to get a straight line. So we're just gonna follow along. And don't worry, if you end up going over it, we can take our tiny little brush and we can fix it. But if you follow along with that engraved line, all the way along, using the top bit of your brush, and I just went over there and it's no problem at all. We'll fix that up later. But go as careful as you can. And bring that down. Perfect. And you don't have to worry about the bottom bit because we'll end up painting this here. I think I'm going to do a dark green, and then on our second layer with the couch, a little bit of a lighter green, just so it looks like the grass is popping in behind. So once again, use the very top of your brush and just follow along. And if your paint is a little too thick, just got to water it down a little bit. And follow along. Now, it might be a smart idea. We're going to switch to our smaller brush just to do the top of the fountain, and that way we can be a little bit more careful. So I like to get some water, and I always roll my brush in the paint and just try to get a nice fine point on that. I'm going to start at the top and just get this all base coated here. And if your paint looks a little too thin, just grab some more white and some more black, and we can just mix a touch more so it is thicker. So if you end up watering it down too much, it's nice and easy to work with because it's really fluid, but then you don't get as much coverage. So there we go, that's much better coverage. So you can just mix some more and we'll get to go there. And paint that a little bit coming out of the top. Perfect. And then once we have all that done with gray, if you did end up going over and getting any of your background, right now is a good time. You can just grab a little bit of black paint and go along, and you can just touch up if you ended up going over anywhere. It's just that easy. A little bit down here. And I might grab a little bit of blue because this was a little bit more blue than black down there. And there we go. And it's like it never happened. Awesome. And it's always a good idea to not leave your brushes in the water. I'm terrible for this, but that is actually how you ruin brushes, and you go through brushes very quickly by leaving them in the water. So it's a good idea to always clean them off and have them dried when you're not using them. So next I'm gonna paint the grass area here. So I'm gonna go in here and grab some green. And I'm gonna add, actually I was gonna add a little bit of black, but I'm just actually gonna test this green. You know what, I'm actually gonna do just this pure green. And then on the next layer of grass, we'll add a little bit of white and maybe even a little bit of yellow to pull that out. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just use the pure green, and we only really need to paint, if you can see the little pencil line there, because the rest is gonna get covered by the couch. So we don't have to use up paint on parts that are just gonna get glued. I'm just gonna carefully follow that line there. And you can switch to your smaller brush. You will get a little bit more control with the smaller brush, but I usually just like to stick with my big one with things like this. But perfect. And we will do the grass on the other side. So we only need to come down to about here, and then you can see, follow the pencil. And just go very carefully around here. Perfect. And that looks like that is going to be it for our base coat on our back layer. Okay, well, let's start by base coating this layer. So I'm just going to get the background out of here so I have a little bit more room. And perfect, we have the iconic couch here. So I'm actually going to start off by painting the grass. So for the grass, I'm going to get a good little chunk of the green paint, and then I'm going to add a little bit of this yellow, and I'm going to add a little bit of white as well, just in order to give it a bit of an interesting tone, and we really want it to pop against the green that we painted the background. So just going to mix this all together and kind of see what tone we get and see if that's what we're looking for here. Going to add just a little bit more white, and then I think that's a pretty good place to start. So and with all the kits, all these little engraved lines are really going to help guide you where your paint has to go. So we're just going to paint this whole bottom area, and using the edge of the brush to bring paint right up to that engraved line for the couch. And don't worry too much about going over the line on the bottom of this couch. I know there's lots of little details with the fringe on the bottom of the couch, but we will make sure that that's all painted, painted nicely to the line when we do the orange of the couch. And use water as you go to make your paint a bit more fluid. And once you get to these close bits, we can switch to our smaller brush. I'm just gonna finish painting the bigger bits here, but switching back and forth between the different brushes is nice and easy, and I'll make sure you don't go too close to any of those lines. And I'm gonna try to keep the paint off of my frame, just because I think I'm going to try to make it look like it has a stain. So I'm gonna use a really watery brown for the frame. So we don't really want to get too much paint on that side because you will see it through, versus doing a solid color. So I'm just gonna finish this part up here and try to awkward angle to get my corner. And there we go. And just following along that line there. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my little brush just so I don't make too many mistakes here. So I'm going to get that nice and wet. And then this just gives you a little bit more precision. Perfect. Oh, and I almost forgot this little bit by the couch. Perfect. Yeah, so I'm going to do my frame next, and pick any color you want for your frame. The frame, the background, any part of this, really get creative and use the colors that you want to use. But for mine here, I'm going to take some brown and put it on my palette, and I'm going to get this really, really watery. So I'm going to just kind of keep pulling in water, and I want this to look very much like a wood stain. I'm just going to test there. There we go, and I'm just going to brush that on and keep the frame natural looking. And as this soaks into the frame and dries, you're going to see that natural wood grain come through, which I think is going to go really nice with the old style of the couch and that bright orange. And just keep adding water as you go. And a bit more paint and a bit more water. Perfect. And then actually, while I have this all mixed here, just going to add a little bit more brown and a little bit more water. I am going to do just the little detail on the couch here, because this part here is brown, and then we'll mix our iconic orange for the couch. But right here, I want it to match the wood grain I just did in the frame. Perfect. Okay. So now let's mix that iconic orangey couch. Now, to mix that color, we're going to start with our mustardy yellow here. And just find a nice dry spot on your palette. This stuff's all dry from a different session here. So we're going to start with this nice mustardy yellow. And we're going to add in just a little bit of red at a time. So I got a good little chunk there. And oh wow, we actually got it our first try. But at home, if it's not quite the right orange, just keep adding the yellow and the red until you get this nice tone. I'm going to actually mix a bit more just because we have quite a bit of an area to cover here, and I think I'm going to do the odd flower here in the same tone. So I'm just going to put my red up there and just bring in a little bit at a time. Oh, I'm glad this tone came together. I didn't think it was going to be that easy. Usually you have to mix little bits of colors to get the right one, but I think that looks pretty good here. So now with painting the couch. So when painting large areas like this, if you try not to have too much paint on your brush, we're going to actually use the side of the flat end of the brush to almost dab the paint on. And by doing this, we won't cover any of these engraved lines. So then we'll be able to see those to make our highlights and our shading later. So if you just use the side of your brush and gently tap the paint on there, we'll be able to see all these lines. Or if you'd prefer to not see the lines, you'll still be able to tell where the engraved is. You're welcome to just go crazy with the paint and cover them up, but it is kind of nice having those guides really visible. And we'll get this. And then just go nice and slow when you get to your engraved lines where the brown is. Or you can also switch to your smaller brush if you'd prefer to have that little bit of extra precision, but and add water as you go if your paint's getting a little sticky. And I'm going to use my big brush just to get paint on the main part of this. But when I do along the bottom there, I am going to grab my small brush just to get in all those little nooks and crannies. So, get that one in the water, and using this one for all these little details here. Perfect. And actually, while we have our orange ready, I'm gonna just do just a little bit of details here on the lamp. So the lamp looks like one of those old kind of hanging lights you'd see in a pool hall. So we're just gonna add a few different tones in here. But while I have the orange ready, we'll do the orange in just a couple little spots there and up here. And then I'm going to switch to my brown, and I'm going to grab pure brown. I'm not going to water this one down to do the pull of the lamp here. And I'm going to add this darker brown just to this little part of the detail of the couch. There we go. Okay. And then a little bit of green, and then just a touch of white. To do the top part of the light here. I'm going to use just a little bit of red and a little bit of white to make a pink to go on this other side of the orange we just painted. And then a little bit of green for these little triangles here. But feel free to paint your lamp any color you'd like. And lastly, I'm gonna just do a little bit of blue with a little bit of white. And I'm gonna add just a touch of red in there. Just a little bit more. For the middle part here. Perfect. So we got our second layer here all base coated. So I'm just going to move this one aside to dry. And then I'm going to take a look at all my little extras here and then just give them a little base coat as well. So for the flowers, I'm going to add a little bit more of this yellow into the orange that we made. And then I'm going to also add some white just to make it a little bit lighter. And I think that's the color I'm going to do all my flowers, just a really vintage looking yellow. Perfect. And with the flowers, it's the same if you want to see the engraved lines. Use the flat side of your brush and tap the paint on. Or if you want to cover them up, you can just go crazy with the paint and use the edge of your brush to almost smush the paint into those little engraved lines. So it just depends on how you want your final piece to look. So I'm just using the flat side of my brush here and giving these guys a little base coat. And then for my two little ones here, I'm going to actually grab some of this really bright yellow. And I'm just going to mix it in there to tone it down just slightly, but I do want that to be a little bit of a different. That's a nice bright yellow for these little ones. And then make sure to brush off some of the paint if you don't want to cover all those little engraved lines. And then those look all nice all together there. I was gonna say, I thought I had lost a piece. You should have get two of the leaves with this one. So for the green, I do want to keep it in the same kind of 70s tones that those ones were in. So I'm gonna grab my green, and I'm actually just gonna put it right here beside all my yellows and my oranges. And I'm just gonna kind of mix these all together and see what happens with the tone, and kind of pull some of those in and try to get. And I always do this slowly just in case if I don't get the results that I'm looking for. So whenever mixing lots of colors together, just start with little bits until you get the tone you want. Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's the color I'm looking for. Just because sometimes you can pull in a lot of paint and then it's not quite right, and then you'll end up wasting all that paint. Perfect. So keep these guys. So right now we're just doing the base coat, and then once this is all dry, we'll come in and we'll start doing all the little details on all 3 layers. So I always like to start each piece, and I like to base coat everything before I move on to the detail, and then I can layer everything up and just kind of see what I'm working with here. Perfect. And this little one here. Perfect. And then lastly, I'm going to paint just the lettering on the little banner. I'm going to leave my my little banner the natural wood, but I am just going to paint inside the letters with my my small brush here. I'm going to go in for this brown just to keep it all in a very similar tone. And with this here, the key is just to go nice and slow and use your brush to follow inside the engraved lines. And you don't have to use the banner or the flowers on your finished piece. These are just kind of like fun little extras. You can use as much or as little as you'd like when we're going to be gluing it all together at the end here. But I do like to paint everything, because then at the end I can mix and match and kind of decide then what I want to actually use once it's all finished and in detail. And if you're not getting a fine tip on your brush, the key is to use a little bit of wallet water and just roll your brush in the paint to get a nice little point here. So that's with any little detail work. The key is using enough water so it can glide, and then making sure you have enough paint on your brush, and then making that fine little point by rolling your brush in the water paint mixture. Perfect. So I'm going to let all these layers dry, and then we'll meet back here to do the detail. Okay, now that all of our base coat is dry, we are gonna move on and start doing some of the detail. So before I do detail, I always like to just stack everything up and kind of have a look at what we're working with here. And we're gonna do the detail on this back layer first. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a little bit of our black paint, And I'm just gonna put it on the palette right there, and I'm gonna add some water. And I'm gonna make it quite watery. And I'm gonna just run it along the back layer, but along the cutout of the engraved line. And what this is gonna do, it's just gonna make this layer pop. So this is just a good idea before we take that layer off. If you just kind of watch me here, I'm just going to add a very watery black line and use the side of your brush. I'm going to try to do this so you can see what I'm doing. I think that angle's good there. So use the side of your brush. We're just going to just put a very watery black shadow. And just run your brush back and forth and kind of try to make it blend a little bit. And if it's way too dark, just add quite a bit more water. And you can also, if you did it too dark and you want to fix your background, just take a little bit of water on a cloth and you can actually just wipe it away. So while the paint's still wet, it'll wipe away very easily. And then, yeah, you're just going to want to make sure it's a very watery black, and you'll be able to see quite good on the fountain here. So I'll just show you there. So that's a little bit dark, so I'm just going to get my brush quite watery, and I'm just going to brush it along. And this is just so we know where this top layer is going to sit as well when we're working on the back. And then we really want the layer with the couch to pop. And don't worry if it looks a little too harsh. Once we take this top layer off, we're going to soften, highlight, and shade the back area. So we're just going to get an idea where everything's sitting. So, and yeah, a lot nice amounts of water. Run that along there. Perfect. So we'll take this layer off so you can kind of see what we're working with here. And if your line is a little too dark, just get your brush really quite watery and just run it along the paint back and forth and blend it in to the background. Just nice and watery, and just kind of keep blending. And we still haven't painted the detail on the fountain, so don't worry too much about these splotchy lines. There we go. And yeah, we'll just keep kind of blending this out. Perfect. And that's probably good for now. So that's just so we can see where the layer is. So while we have this nice watery black, we're going to do all of our shading. So I'm just going to grab a little more black, a little more water, and that's a nice amount of black. And just so you can see on my white paper here, it's coming out almost like a gray. So you can do lots of nice tests before you go on your piece. But this is what shading is all about, is a really watery black paint. So now that we have this all set up in a really nice consistency, we're just going to do the whole inside of this fountain. So follow along the engraved line there. And we're going to want to do, starting from this back lip, and we're going to want to go around this part in the middle as well. And we just really want the whole thing with this nice watery black. This is actually a nice place to practice your watery black before we get on to shading other things. And just using the edge of your brush. And if you run out, just grab a little bit more black paint and a little bit more water and make that nice consistency. And you can always test on your paper before you go into your piece to check if your paint to water ratio is enough. I'm just gonna fill that in. And then we're also gonna do just this second lip here. Now this is all gonna be covered by the couch, so you actually don't have to worry about this middle bit, which will make it a little bit easier. So that's actually a good place to practice your shading if you're still not quite confident with it yet. You can practice on the inside of there until you get that nice consistency. And don't worry about going over too much there, because once we add our highlighting in, we'll cover all that up. So other little parts that are going to need shading, we're going to go underneath the lip of the fountain up here. And we're going to do just a little bit in and behind all these little fountain details there. And along this side here. So I'm going to do just a tiny bit up here where that would come out. And that actually looks pretty good for shading. One thing I wanted to do, so when I did my background, I had this little bit of a blue line here. It's not quite as light as I was thinking it was going to be. So I am just going to open up my blue. And this is completely optional. If you like your background, you can just skip ahead. But I do want this to look like there's just a little bit of light illuminating in behind this fountain. So I'm just going to take some white and a little bit of blue. And I'm also going to just clean my brush off and grab a little bit of black. I'm going to put the black up here because I'm not sure how much black I'm going to want to bring into this just yet. So I'm going to start by taking the blue and the white. And that's actually what I'm looking for. So I'm going to get this quite watery as well. And then I'm just going to use my flat brush and I'm just going to follow along here and bring it down. And this is quite watery. It looks like it's going to be a really stark light blue, but because it's so watery, as soon as this dries, it is actually going to be lighter. So I'm just going to work this in all along the edge there. And it's still quite watery and my brush is still a little bit watery. I'm just going to go back and forth until all this water kind of soaks into the wood and just work that light blue back and forth. And if it looks a little stark here, wash your brush off completely. Oh, my water's getting a bit dirty. I might have to go do a water change, but get it wiped off completely. And we want it to be damp, not dripping, but damp. And then start up here, going back and forth, and keep going all the way down until you meet your blue. And then just keep working it in and slowly work it up. And that's going to pull just a little bit of this blue paint into the black, but without having a really harsh line. It's just going to soften that up a little bit. So we're just going to go back and forth. And I think that's more what I was looking for. So if you can see the difference between the two sides, I just wanted this to add a little bit of something interesting instead of just a pure black background. So now we can do the same thing on the other side. Just going to grab a bit of this paint and I'm going to follow this. I'm going to follow this line along here. And what's going on? I can cut this audio out.
Oh, are you using this? I was going to try to get my scanning rig together. Try to assemble that as best I can.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye. Oh.
You want me to just leave right now? Okay, see ya.
It's just a lot of audio to cut out if not.
Bye.
And yeah, just run the same amount of blue along here, work it around the fountain, and then clean my brush off, make sure it's nice and watery, start up top, and slowly meet that line there. And just work it back and forth. Perfect. And the nice thing about paint is you can work on this for days to come. I never start and finish a piece in one go. So if this dries and you want it a little bit more blue, go ahead and just keep adding a little bit more blue, or if you want it more black, or if you want a different color sky completely. The nice thing about paint is you can keep adding layers and then nothing's final. You can keep painting as much or as little as you'd like. Awesome. So I am happy with my sky and I'm happy with the shading we've done so far. So next we're going to do a little bit of highlighting, and then we're going to also do our little bit of watermarks for this fountain here. So I have my little brush here. I'm just going to make sure it's nice and clean. And I'm going to dry it off a little bit. I still like my brush to be damp for this. And we are going to do exactly what we did with shading, but we're going to do it with white and we're going to do some highlighting. I'm running out of room on my palette here. Okay, we're going to go over here. And so I got my white down and I'm going to try to get it quite watery, and you can tell it's kind of coming out a little bit gray, and it's just because my water's dirty. I'm okay with this, but if you want it to be more of a pure white, just going and changing your water is a good thing. It's a good practice to have, is keeping your water clean. But okay, so for highlights, let's start at the top of the fountain here. So I'm just going to add just a little bit. So this is a nice watery white, very similar to our black. I would say I usually do the white a little less watery, because the black is so harsh. It needs to be quite watery in order for it to blend. But the white, if you have a little bit more paint than water, it's just going to make it stand out a little bit more, because the highlights are really what kind of catches the eye and makes it start to look more realistic. So start with some water, and then you can adjust to the consistency that you like to work with. But I like to work with, yeah, a little bit more paint than water with my white. So here, I just added a little bit of a white line on the very top lip of this fountain. And here it's kind of just about adding little bits of white wherever you would like to stand out. So this little, I think it's a fish on the side of the fountain here. I'm just gonna add little bits of white to make all this stand out, and just run your brush along the engraved line on anything that should be kind of in the foreground. I'm gonna add just a little bit of white to this as well. And around this corner, and on this lip here. I'm not going to get too crazy about any highlights in this area because I really want the couch to stand out. So I'm mostly going to highlight up at the top of the fountain, and then just some little bits on the side of the fountain, just because I really do want that couch to be our main focus. So just work with your watery white and add some little touches and play around with the highlights. Perfect. And you know what? I think that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to keep this nice and simple. Oh, maybe a little bit right here just to match that other side. But, and then you also, once you have your second layer on, you can go in and you can add any shades or highlights depending on where that top layer is going to sit. But I think that's where I'm happy with right now. So we're going to work on our water next. So I'm just going to get my brush nice and clean again. And we're going to grab some white, and we're not going to add too much water, just a little bit. But we do want it to be quite a bit more noticeable with doing the water on the fountain. So I'm just going to start off by following the engraved lines. So I'm just going to start at the top and work my way down here. So right now this is, I just followed the engraved lines, and that's kind of where it's taking us. So that's actually the bulk of the dark white that I want to do, but I am going to just extend the lines a little bit over and kind of coming down, and I'm going to do this just quite gently, if you can see. And you can also make your white more watery for this if you don't want it to look too harsh. And I'm just going to kind of add in little bits to try to make this look natural. So you can kind of just extend your lines a little bit and just very gently add in little white marks. And don't worry if you end up doing something that you're not crazy about. It's just as easy as grabbing some black paint, touching it up, and trying again. So don't worry too much. It's not as hard as it looks. And just take a little painting leap with me here. So I'm just gonna very gently and lightly add these lines in, and I want to kind of bring very softly the water down to this one. And I'm going to have just a little bit also coming down off that bit of the fountain as well. And if they're looking a little too harsh, you can, here, I'll show you here. So if your white lines are looking a little too thick, let me actually just put in a big one. So if you ended up doing something like that and it's just not quite what you were looking for, you can grab your black and just follow along the one edge of it and just bring it back in. And you can layer between your white and your black. So if you end up going too thick with your lines, go and just take out half of the white line with your black, just to tone it down a little bit. And then come back with your white, and you can really play around with this, and having black in behind the white is actually going to make the fountain stand out more. So don't worry too much if you end up making a mistake. Oh, like I had way too much water there and it just... And if you do end up getting too much water, you can always take your cloth and just do a little dab. Perfect. And I'm gonna grab a bit more white. And slowly, lightly, just bring that down, and I'm gonna bring a few little bits. This is actually the first fountain I've ever painted. And if you end up getting a little too much white, your finger is a great tool just to kind of dab it down, and it kind of just blurs it a little bit so it can make it look a little bit more natural. So we're just gonna keep kind of, this is actually very similar to what I do when I'm painting fur. It's just very light strokes where you're just getting little bits of paint. So this is good practice if you want to paint any fur. So we're just going to get that to connect. And we're going to bring this down and make it connect with the bottom as well. And if you don't like the look of this, you can just stay with a little bit of the fountain on top. It's whatever you like. This is your piece. Yeah, you can paint this however you would like. I'm just gonna kind of experiment here, and I'm just gonna add just a few little like spots of water. So I don't know if you can see this here. I'm just gonna add just like a couple little dots as if there's some spray happening, which is very common with a fountain. Make it look a little bit more realistic. A few little dots here and there. And same thing up here. We're just gonna, need a little bit of a finer point. So to get a nice point on your brush, it's the rolling action. That's always what makes that come to a nice point. There we go. And just gonna dab all that in there. Okay, and then now that we have our white out here, I am actually going to add just a little bit of a white line in the fountain here. I think it's just going to be able to connect the water a little bit nicer. So I added it in with a dry paintbrush with the white, and now I'm going to get my brush really watery, and I'm just going to kind of blend that line down. And same thing on this side. Just add a little bit of a line in there. Once again, this is optional. The couch is going to be the main focus of the piece, but little things I like to add as I go and I see the need for it. So I'm actually going to add just a tiny bit of blue into the fountain as well. Now that I'm looking at it, I think that's going to look nice. So I'm going to grab a little bit of blue, and I had my white there, so I'm just going to mix that in with my white. And I'm going to add the tiniest touch of green. So when I'm doing blue, if like I'm doing a bright blue sky or really blue for anything, I do like to add just a touch of green. And I put just the very tip of this small brush into the green, and I'm just going to mix that in with the blue. And that's a little more turquoise than I wanted, so I'm going to grab a little bit more blue. But it just makes the blue have a little more depth by adding just a touch of green to it. So, and it just makes it look like a very tropical blue, which is one of my favorites. So I have this quite watery as well, and I'm just going to with the watery brush that into the fountain here and along the front, and just add a little bit of depth to this. I'm not going to go to the very front edge of the engraved line. I still want to actually have that bit of a shadow there, but it's more just to bring the blue up to this little white line that we brought in. And I will go and add a little bit of highlight after this onto the water. And then I'm going to bring that just in front of the fountain as well. Yeah, perfect. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that. So wash my brush. I'm going to grab just some white. And my brush was quite watery, so this does have a nice watery consistency to it. And I'm just going to bring a little bit of highlight to the top of the water there. And then I also want to add a little bit of that highlight just to the front of this part here. And then just kind of bring it over the edges a little bit. Yeah, that's nice. Then it just makes that look a little bit more natural. And then I'm just going to highlight some of these bigger drips coming down. I'm just going to connect them in with the fountain there. And just kind of dab in my brush and connecting this down. And I'm just gonna add a little bit more. So that looks like it's running. You know what? Not bad for a first fountain, hey? Okay. I'm gonna bring the middle of this up just a little bit higher, just because on fountains, the middle always seems to kind of go up and over like that. Awesome, so I'm probably gonna leave this here like this. Oh, just a little bit right here. Brought up my black a little too far there. Okay, so I'm liking the way that this is looking, so I'm just gonna clean my brush. Put that aside. I should clean this one too. It's best to not leave your brushes in the water like I always do, because that is how you ruin your brushes. And you can see this one already has quite the interesting shape to it. So I'm terrible and I always leave my brushes in water, but it's best to try not to if you can get in that good habit, unlike me. Okay, yeah, that is looking good. So my paint isn't too wet, so I'm not too worried. I'm just gonna grab my second layer and put that on top and kind of see what we're working with here. So that dark line we did before, it's still there, but it's not harsh. So it's nice that it just elevates that couch up to the second level. But no, I'm pretty happy with that for our background. So I think I'm probably gonna move on and start this layer. And then you can also touch this up as you go. I like to leave the piece like this while I'm painting my second layer. And then I can just kind of touch things up as I go on both layers and make sure it's looking like I want. So with this layer here, I'm gonna start with the couch. So with the shading on this couch, this brown that we have is actually the perfect color for the shading. So I'm just gonna pop that open. And it's going to be exactly like we did on the background with the black, but we're just going to do it with the dark brown. So I'm just going to bring this down over here. I'm going to get it nice and watery. And you can test it out down here. It's coming up as just a nice light brown because of the amount of water we have in there. So with the couch, we're just going to follow along the engraved lines, and I'm going to go on the right side of the line. I always like to do the sun kind of in this top corner. I do it with all my pieces. It just kind of seems like the most natural. So as if the sun was coming here, we want to just shade anything on the other side of the line. So I'm going to do my shade there. And I am going to bring it down there. So you can kind of just keep where the sun would be in mind. And bring this down there and all the way through there. And just follow along with this nice brown and just really show off all the tufts in this couch. I'm just gonna bring that down, one over. And then I'm gonna do actually this whole top of the cushion because that would be overshadowed by the couch. So get this nice and watery, and if you run out, just grab a little bit more brown and water it down. I'm going to bring that across. Perfect. And I'm going to follow along on that side and then also on this side of the line. So keeping to the right side of the engraved lines on the couch. This one here is kind of the exception just because this would be further up than the this part in the couch behind. So every once in a while there is a little bit of an exception to the shadow rule. And then I'm also going to follow along the bottom here because that cushion would come out just a little bit. So we'll just run our brush along the side of here as well. Perfect. And then the last thing I want to do, and I'm out of brown, so I'm going to grab a little bit more brown, make sure I have enough water. And I'm just going to, you don't have to be too careful with this, with following the engraved lines, but I'm just going to kind of add a few little brown lines here and there on here, just to kind of show off the fringe on the bottom of this couch. Perfect. Okay, yeah, I'm liking the way that that's looking. So let's go ahead and let's highlight the couch. Let's just work on it while we have it. So if your orange down here is still wet, you can just add a little bit of white to this, but mine is quite dry by now. So I'm just gonna start by I'm gonna do it right by here just so I can kind of match it a bit. So I'm gonna take a little bit of the mustard yellow and I'm going to add I'll start by putting the red up here and just add a little bit of red until we get that orange again. That looks pretty good. And then we're gonna add some white to this. So I'm gonna take a good glob of white, but I'm just gonna put it up and on this dry part of my palette here. And I'm gonna pull in just a little bit of white at a time. We don't want to go just pure white for the first bit of highlighting because it will be quite harsh. So I like to do, when I'm highlighting something this large, a lighter tone of this color and then white on top of that for kind of the final highlight. So that's a pretty good color there. So as you can see, it's just a really light version of the couch color, like an orangey color, and we can come and test it on our couch here. So we're really going to want to accentuate the tops of the couch and then follow along on the other side of that shaded line. So that looks pretty good there. So I'm going to go and follow along here and just kind of bring it down. And I'm going to do that curve here just to really show that the couch has those tufts that the vintage couches all had. Just kind of bring your line down. That's looking pretty good. If it's looking a little too harsh for you, once you do a couple, you can wash the paint off your brush and have your brush just kind of damp. And you can kind of just take that paint out and blend it a little bit. So just kind of blend that line out a little bit if it's a little too harsh for you. And then you can kind of pull up some of the water with your finger. But it does dry not as light as when you paint it. So when it dries, it might be the perfect consistency there. Okay. Just kind of follow all these tufts along here. And then for the bottom, I'm gonna, see, I think I stuck my brush in the white. So if you make a mistake like this, I just put pure white paint there. It was not my nice shaded. You can get your brush nice and wet, and it can actually act as a little bit of an eraser. And then you can just kind of pull the paint off, rub your brush to get the paint up, and then you can just dab your cloth. And it's like it never happened. So don't worry, making mistakes is quite common. Okay, let's try that again. Oh, and you know what? I'm out of my light orange here. So I'm just gonna mix a little bit more. So I'm coming in for that mustard yellow and a little bit of my red. Mix that up. It's looking like a pretty nice orange. And then I had a bit of white left up here from the last time, so I'm just going to bring some of that white down. And I just need a little bit more. There we go. And we got a nice light orange again. And I'm going to get it nice and watery. So for this bottom tuft, I'm actually just going to add a little bit of a highlight just kind of to the middle here. Just because this part here would actually be tucked into the couch, so I just kind of want to show off that these middles here would be catching the light. And then now that that's done, I'm going to take this and I'm going to just do a very light line and kind of just outline the right side like this. And this paint is quite watery, so I don't know if you can tell, this is a little bit darker than what's already been drying, so don't worry too much until it dries with how it's gonna look. So that looks pretty good there. And then I'm gonna, while I got my light orange, I'm just gonna kind of accentuate this front of the cushion here. So a little bit on the edge here, and I'm gonna follow this engraved line all the way along. And also a little bit on there. And same on this side. And you can play around with your highlights anywhere you think could use a little bit of light. Now that this is dried, this is a little light, so I'm just gonna go back through and just add a touch more to the very tops of the tufts here. And then I'm also going to use the side of my brush with this color, and I'm just going to kind of make sure all the edges have just a little bit. And this is also going to help make this pop against the background. So I'm just going to kind of tap my brush on just the edges, just so this couch really stands out and you can see that it's a 3D piece. And then I'm just going to bring that line I just did down all the way to the wood part of the couch there. And then with the last little bit we have, you can kind of just randomly add some little white lines in the fringe here. And I'm just doing it very randomly. I'm just dabbing my brush all the way along the bottom there. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of a highlight on top of the wood bar as well. And that's looking pretty good. And I'm just going to take that little bit of a light, and I just want this to stand out from the grass. So I'm just going to follow above the engraved line on the fringe, if you can see that there. And I'm just going to add a little bit of this light orange all the way along. Go. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that so far. So I think we're going to move on to the grass here. So I really want to do this grass nice and textured. I wanted to leave this just so it looks like it's in the background, but on this level here, we're going to take our brush and kind of just give it a little bit of a flick, and kind of what we're trying to do is we're trying to mess up the ends of this brush so we can stipple the grass on. So let's start by mixing our green. Is any of my green wet? Nope, it's all dry. Okay, so we're gonna grab a little bit of white. I'm gonna put it just up here. Clean my brush. I'm gonna grab a nice amount of green and I'm gonna put it down here. And And I'm gonna go in, oh, and I closed this one, and grab this bright yellow that I have here. And actually I'm also gonna grab just a little bit of the mustardy yellow, because that's dry. Okay. We'll put a little bit of new mustard yellow here. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to mix a shade lighter than this green here. So I'm going to start with my green. I'm going to go just right here. So I got my green. I'm just going to grab a little bit of my white, a little bit of this yellow, a little bit of this yellow. That's kind of coming along, and I'm going to grab more white until I get a nice light green. And I do want to still keep in that 70s palette, which is why I'm adding the yellow to the green. It makes it just a little bit more sagey. And is that light enough? Let's just kind of come over here and do a little test. Yeah, so that's very much what we're looking for. So if you put your green on here and you can see it stand out, you don't want it to stand out a lot, but enough that you notice that you're going to be putting some work into here. And if you went too light, just add some more green to it. If you went too dark, just keep adding a little bit of white to it. So, and what we're going to do once this is done is I like to really wreck my brush when I do this. So I really just like push my bristles into that green paint. And in doing that, I'm going to try to get this close to the camera. If you can see, my bristles are all kind of messed up, and that's exactly what you want when you're doing something with grass here. So you can kind of see the effect if you just bounce your brush onto the wood piece and then bounce it into your green and onto the wood piece. You get this really nice texture for grass by doing this. So we're just gonna, and don't worry too much if you get some onto your little lamppost there. We can touch all that up later. But you really do want the stippling of the grass going to all of the different edges, so we can give that a little bit of a cleanup if you end up going too far over. So we're just gonna use this technique and get a nice texture into the grass all the way through. And if you're not confident starting on your piece, having a little white piece of paper behind here is nice, and you can practice on here before you practice on your painting. And if they're looking too clean, just really get your brush in there and mess it up. That's a good way to get a nice texture. I will warn you, this brush will kind of be hooped after doing this, but we've done all our base coating, so we're pretty much done with this flat brush. And then this is a good brush to keep around if you do any grass in the future. I have a few brushes that are for grass and for doing bushes and any sort of texture like that. So we'll just make sure we got a nice amount of grass all over here. And as it dries, it will get a little bit darker. So if it dries a little too dark and you can't really notice the grass and you want to really highlight the grass, add just a little bit more white to it and do another layer. The more layers of grass you do, and you do it a little bit lighter every layer further up, is how you make it look like there's a lot of depth and really realistic. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll wait and see when it dries. I might need to add a few little touch-ups here and there, but I'm pretty happy with that. And actually, while I still have this green here and it's nice and wet, I'm just gonna clean my brush. As you can see, the brush is a little bit rough now. But I'm just gonna grab a little bit more white and I'm just gonna put it up here, and I'm gonna bring just a little bit of white at a time. I'm gonna make this just a shade lighter. And I'm gonna just add a little bit of lighter grass in a line just in front of the couch. And I'm just gonna extend it just on the outside of the couch. And this is just to really show that there's some depth. So I'm just gonna add the white line in front of the couch. This is just to show that there's depth. Oh, and not quite enough, so I'm gonna go in there and try not to contaminate my white too much. And just add just a little bit there. And then just kind of sporadically blend that into this little front bit. And then we'll see how that dries, because it always dries just a little differently than you think. I'm going to actually grab just a little bit of just the pure green and just go in very lightly, just adding a little bit of a darker tone here and there. And you can just really play around with all your different tones to make this have some depth. Okay, yeah, I think I am happy with that. Oh, and this guy has shifted. There we go, we'll reline up. So next we're gonna add just a little bit of detail to our little light fixture here. So I really want the light to look like it's on. So the key is definitely gonna be our highlighting. So just gonna grab some white and try to find some room on my palette here. There we go. And get this, once again, nice and watery. So to make it look like the light is on, we're gonna want to use quite a bit of white here in the middle. And I'm just gonna kind of go along both sides of the engraved line. And then I have that white spot in the middle there. And I'm just gonna kind of slowly move the paint out a little bit, if that makes sense. So following that engraved line and just kind of adding little bits of white here and there. I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab actually pure white instead of the watery white. And I'm just going to kind of dab my paint in the middle and make it look like there is a bulb right in the middle there. And then to make it not look so stark, I'm just going to kind of follow along the top of this engraved line and the top of these engraved lines and just kind of add a few little dots here and there so it looks like that light is illuminating. And you can continue this throughout the light and just add little bits of white here and there to try and make it look like. I'm going to follow along the whole bottom to make it look like that light is on. And then also we can add a little bit of the white up into here. And I'm going to do it just in the middle up into there. And we'll have to take a step back and see how that looks and see if that's kind of the effect we're going for. And then I'm gonna, while I have my white, I'm gonna run it just along the very edge of the lampshade. And I'm gonna follow along that circle and then also along the very edge of the lamp. And that's just really gonna make that pop and make it look like it's on this level. And then with the white, I'm gonna also follow along on the right side of this engraved line as well. And all the way down. And then I'm just gonna pull that white out anywhere that would have a little bit of a crevice. And then I'm also gonna go along the other side of this one And that is just to show that it's 3D. So just very gently bring your white. And I kind of went a little too crazy with the white there, but it's no worries at all. Once we're done that, I'm just going to grab a little bit of my brown. I'm just going to clean up that middle a little bit. A little bit brown and clean this up. So if you go too far with your white, just grab a little bit of brown and kind of blend that in and make it look a little bit more natural. And then adding little bits here and there. Okay, so now I'm going to take a little bit more of just the pure white. And I don't want it too watery. I do want this to stand out. And just like we did on the edge of this lamppost, I'm going to do the same thing on the edge of the couch. And this is with the actual white. So this is going to stand out quite a bit more than that light orange we mixed. And I'm just rubbing the very side of my brush along the edge of the engraved, of the piece that's cut out here. And it's just to make this stand out. Bring that line down so the couch looks like it's on top of the grass. And then now you can add just little bits of white here and there where you want to accentuate on the couch. So I'm just gonna, and I just don't really have a rhyme or reason to this. I just kind of add wherever it looks like it could use a little bit more highlighting. And then sometimes it's not quite right, and then I just come in with a little bit of orange and just kind of take it back a little bit. So really just play around and kind of see how it looks. And it's a good idea to stop and take a step back and look at your piece from far away, because it's hard when you're this close to know what all these tiny little details are going to look like once you step back. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I was trying to highlight. I'm just going to add a couple little white marks in there as well along the side. These are actually a little dark, so I'm just going to get my brush nice and watery, and I'm just going to add some water and tone them down a little bit. Same with these ones. You can just add a little bit of water, and you're just kind of rubbing the paint off just a little bit with the watery brush. This one's not really budging, so you can really get in there with your brush, or once it dries, take a look, and if it's still a little dark, just mix a little bit of orange and you can just tone it down a little bit. But I think that's looking pretty good there. So the only other thing I'm actually going to add, I would like this couch to stand up just a little bit more than this fountain. So I'm just going to take a little bit of watery black, and I'm going to run it, and I'm painting along the back layer. And then it's a little harsh, so I just have my brush nice and watery, and I'm just gonna work that back and forth. Back and forth, and really work that paint out. Yeah, it's better. I just wanted that couch to really look like it's on another layer there. And once this dries too, you can take a little bit of a better look. And now it's trying to figure out what little extras you want to use. So you could do just the "I'll be there for you" sign. You can also mix in a couple flowers if you'd like. And this part, really just get creative, play around with what you'd like, step back, and you can take a couple days to kind of deciding what you want where. But for now, what we'll do is we're going to put some detail on these as well. So I'm just actually going to move, this looks good as is. I'm not going to add anything else to this, so I'm just going to put this guy aside. And I'm just going to bring all my flowers up, and I'm going to add some nice details to them. And actually, when I did these, I kind of pictured doing something like this with the yellow and the orange. And then you could also do your flowers along the bottom and your banner along the top, or you can really get creative and glue this wherever you would like, or you can do nothing at all. You can just do the couch, the fountain, and none of the little extras. So, but we're going to do just a little bit of detail in our flowers here. So I have them all just lined up so I can see them all at once. Is this green? Oh, it's still a little bit wet. So if not, just mix a new green, but I'm just going to take a little bit of white and try to get a little bit of this green. Oh yeah, there's some green there. So, and add some white and a little bit more of this orange. Till you get a lighter green than here. And just gonna add some highlights. On the sides of the leaves. And I think I want it a little lighter than that, so just grab a little bit more white. And just adding a little depth to these leaves here. And if you don't want to paint on your background, you can just do them on the white. I just like to see what they're looking like and how they're standing out, so I like to layer everything up. But if you do slip, you are getting your back piece. So painter be warned that you can just paint them on the white background if it's a little easier. And then I'm going to grab just a little bit of pure white. Well, it's a tiny bit green just because of my brush, and then just really adding a highlight to those edges. A little bit more water. And then I'm going to use a little bit of brown, and then I'm going to put the mustard yellow, and then I'll better clean this before I contaminate my red, the red up here. And then just going to slowly, I'm going to add all that yellow, make a darker version of that orange. You could just go in with pure brown, but just because we're working with flowers, I don't want it to be too dark. So, okay, and then for here, I'm gonna just add this darker bit into the middle of the flower. I'm just gonna kind of follow along the engraved lines and just really just add some depth to those, all those little petals. With the lines on the flowers, it's nice and easy to see where the darker color should be. So, and you can just go through. These tiny ones are a little bit harder, so I'm just gonna add just a little bit kind of here and there, just because they are quite tiny, but our little highlighting on this will end up going pretty far. So you can just add a little shade here and there. And then the biggest thing is to kind of get the middle of the flower, and then just a few flowers here and there. Then I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna grab some white. And then I'm gonna grab actually just a little bit of this really bright yellow. And I think that's gonna be a really nice highlight. So just a really nice pastel yellow. And just gonna add just a little bit of light to kind of the very ends of the petals, and just kind of follow along the natural lines there and add a little bit of highlight here and there, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of highlight to each of the ones right around the center, just to really show the difference between the light and the black there. So adding just little bits. Little bits of highlight as you go. And if you run out, just some yellow, some white, a bit more white. Oh, and some water. It's a little too harsh without a little bit of water. And just follow along the natural petals here. And whatever color you used, just go in with a darker and then a lighter version of that color is kind of the best way to make it look like there's depth. And then I'm just going to kind of go along the very edges of the flowers and just kind of, just like we did with the couch, and making the tops of the flowers pop. Just kind of running the brush with some paint along. Awesome. So with the kit, you get a little pot of glue and a popsicle stick. So I'm just gonna open this one up here and get that one ready to go. So for this set, feel free to decorate this as you would like. I think I decided on going a little bit more minimalistic, so I'm not going to use the banner or these two flowers here. I'm actually just going to use the two smallest and one of the medium flowers and the leaves. So I'm just going to set these guys aside. And I'm going to try and I'm just going to put these kind of how I like them over here. And then we're going to take our top layer and we're going to flip it over here. And then with the popsicle stick, you don't need a lot of glue. This glue it's a really good, super strong wood glue. So you only need a little bit here and there. So I'm just going to spread along the back of the couch. I'm going to do a little bit just on the top of the lamp here. And you don't want to do too much, because if you end up putting too much, especially on small bits like this, the glue will actually spill over and onto your piece. It will dry like a yellowy clear, so you can always touch it up if you do end up getting a little bit of glue, but just to kind of prevent that, don't go too crazy with this. And there we go, and then now it's all the little bits. So I'm just gonna put, yeah, just a little bit on here, and I'm just gonna lightly rub it along the edges here. There we go. I'm not going to put any glue on our little hanging tabs, just because I don't want to get too much in the middle and then restrict our string going in there at all. So once you have a nice light layer on most of your back here, we're going to flip this over and carefully line it up and then drop it down. And then just make sure your tabs are all lined up and press down and give it a little bit of pressure. So as you can see, I have a little bit kind of coming through here and here. So if you want, you can actually grab like a little Q-tip. You could even wet your brush and just clean that up a little bit now while it's wet, and then you won't have to worry about it too much when it's dry. So just gonna give this a nice push. You could clamp this if you want, but it's not necessary, but if you do have clamps lying around, you could always clamp it. So I'm gonna get my brush just damp, and I'm just gonna run it along the edge. And there we go. Blend that glue in. Perfect, and then once this layer is done, we got our little flower layer here. So I'm just gonna get these into position on how I like them. think I am happy with that there. So with gluing these ones, just gonna take that brush out of there. You're gonna wanna just take a look and see what part is actually touching the wood, because we're not gonna need glue under this little leaf, just because then it will get a little bit messy. So I'm just gonna pick it up by that leaf to know that I don't have to put glue on there. And then just put that on there and stick those down. And just follow along all your little extras and glue them where you'd like them. Okay, this one's gonna be a little bit trickier, so I'm just gonna get my glue kind of ready, just because quite a bit of it is off the actual piece. So I'm gonna want to do the inside of this one. And if you do end up going over, it's not a huge deal. It's just a little bit of glue will be just exposed on the back, but it will just dry. So I believe it was all perfect. And then I'm going to want to put I think that's perfect there. And then just, yeah, hold it down for a couple seconds just till it gets a little bit of tack. Perfect. And then before you do your string, you're gonna wanna let this dry overnight, just to make sure everything's set and secure before we string it up. But I am just gonna show you what to do with your string. So, once it's dry, this just gets fed through these little hangers here. And there's some pretty cool things if you look up macrame online. There's some pretty cool things you can do with the string if you do want to do some crazy ties, or you can actually get some pretty cool beads that can go on this. But I'm just going to keep it really simple. But feel free to get creative with yours. So I am just going to hold mine together at the top, and I'm just going to tie a knot with both pieces together. And then this is a nice cotton macrame cord, so you're gonna get, you can separate the end here and you're gonna get some nice fringe going on. And then once this is all dry, once again, I wouldn't recommend doing this until it's completely dry, it is ready to hang on your wall. And you can just use a little tack or a nail, or you could get a fancy hook if you want to do something a bit more creative. And that's it. The I'll Be There For You set is finished. And then you have all these little extras that you can use for other projects, or you can also decide if you want to add anything on later. The glue is ready, so you can get creative and have fun with that. Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in and painting along with me.